All right, welcome to part two of the lesson on the invasion of Normandy. Again, just to review a little bit, when we talk about the invasion of Normandy, we're talking about everything that goes into it: the planning process, the preparations, um, going into definitely D-Day, the beginning of this whole thing, and then today we're going to continue on talking about. We finished off last time kind of introducing D-Day and that it was an overall success. We're going to talk more about D-Day at the beginning of this part of the lesson, as well as we're going to be going into the overall fight for Normandy and the liberation of France by the time we get to the end of this lesson. So, just to continue on, we talked about how on June 5th, 1944, the paratroopers come in, with the idea of basically capturing key points and causing as much chaos as possible within the German defenses. Then they have the amphibious assault coming in June 6th, taking the 5 beaches, 2 Canadian, 2 American, and 2 British, 1 Canadian, and 2 American beachheads in the Normandy area. That ends up being overall successful, although the one beach in doubt was Omaha. And then once those beaches were secured enough, we start landing in a ton of stuff. So, something that I didn't show last time, and I should have showed this in the last part, was just a lot of pictures just depicting a lot of this. The picture in the upper left is just the best picture I could find, where you get a photograph that just shows the massive amount of ships and materials that on the morning of June 6th are starting to head from from Great Britain down to Normandy, France. Upper right-hand corner is a picture of basically a lot of paratroopers getting dropped. I'm not sure. I would almost guess those are not a picture from D-Day. I think that's probably Operation Market Garden. But the idea is it does show just the idea of just these massive amounts of paratroopers. I think it was something like 20,000, 22,000 paratroopers dropped night of June 5th into the morning of June 6th behind enemy lines, essentially. Then you see a lot of pictures of the Allies attacking on the beaches. Some pictures like really in the mode of just the fight going on. And then you have that overall picture of just showing a bunch of vehicles and men getting off on the beaches and assaulting. If you really want to see the experience, there's a lot of movies and video games that try to recreate the experience of taking these beaches. Whether it be the one that we usually see a lot is Omaha Beach, but again, there's movies and documentaries and video games that do all of them, all 5 of the beaches essentially. Like, this is a big thing in human history, especially from the Allied perspective, or the Allied countries' perspective even today. So, like I said last time, though, this is an overall success, at least on the first day. But if you also remember from what I talked about, well, Rommel's idea was, hey, get them on the beaches. Well, now we've just shown that didn't get them on the beaches. The Germans did have a backup plan, though. Their backup plan was those panzer divisions that needed to come in and just squash the Allied forces while they're on the beaches. As they're unloading all this stuff, like what you see in some of those pictures, as they're unloading, come and hit them then. The Allies, they're unprepared, they're not in a good position, defensive position, and you want to hit them before they get too much men and material off and before they can push in enough to get that good defensible position. So, just going, this is where we're going to be talking about a guy named Garbo. Like, this is one of the more specific stories I guess I wouldn't have to talk about, especially in just a lesson that's meant to give you more of an overview of what this is, what the invasion of Normandy is, but this is just one of those stories that is just too good not to tell. Basically, Juan Pujols Garcia, or Juan Pujols, I've seen the name a couple different times. It was said both ways there. Codename Garbo is considered one of the most famous spies of all time. Not just in World War II, as it says here, but all time. Anyways, he is not even from an allied nation. He's from Spain, which is a neutral nation. But if you remember, we talked about the Spanish Civil War and just all the problems they had there. And through all just the chaos and death and destruction of the Spanish Civil War, this guy sees all this and just basically comes to the conclusion, I really don't like totalitarianism. He actually looked at both sides and saw what the communists were doing on one side and how they were treating everybody, and how the fascists and Nazis were treating everybody on the other side as like, and he basically came to the conclusion, I hate totalitarianism, and I'll make it my life's goal to work against them. Now, his goal in life was to become essentially a playwright, a writer, or even maybe, I can't remember, I think one of his dreams was also be a stage actor. I'm not sure on that part, but playwright definitely. And he wrote up a couple things, but nothing ever took hold, and he was kind of considered just like this bit of a flamboyant failure in life. But when World War II starts up, he immediately approaches the British and basically wants to become an agent for them. He also approaches the Germans and says he wants to become an agent for them. But his true intention was to really work for the Allies. He wants to bring down Hitler. He despises Hitler and Mussolini. The Germans actually do use him, but he doesn't do anything good for them, essentially. Really, what he's trying to do is get their trust, so that they would trust what he says. And then he also starts kind of collecting information on the British. And the British initially reject him and say, we don't want you with us. Sorry, we don't trust you. You're Spanish. The Spanish seem to be more kind to the Axis powers. But he comes back again with a bunch of information, says, hey, this is what I know about you, which scared the British, like, how'd you find out about all of this? And it's really just him kind of just watching everything and coming to conclusions. You can, by the way, you can read up on him if you want. Again, another good topic to do for a research paper is on Garbo. But right after he tells them, here's what I know about you guys and the stuff you're doing, the plans you have going. And then he tells them, here's what I know about the Germans too. And right then and there, the British then realize this guy could be good, but they still don't trust him completely right up front. They don't know what's going on here. So they assign a guy to be with them. I can't remember his name, just say Agent Smith to going forward here. So they assign someone from British Secret Service to be with them. And together they kind of work to misinform the Germans as best as possible to lead them astray. And he becomes the key figure in this whole idea of having an efficient spy network. And interestingly enough, this spy network that he came up with, and then later on that this Agent Smith helps him out with, again, I can't remember the guy's name. I should have looked this up. I apologize. Were fake spies. 27 of them in total. In fact, Garbo was able to get a lot of his information with just 2 or 3 fake identities with the Germans before approaching the British. And they were so effective, because when I talked about a playwright earlier, he wrote backgrounds to them. He gave them histories and past. He was able to get documents for them and actually have them documented in like Spanish records or American records or British or German records and things like that, that these people existed. Like no one ever really saw them. In some cases, he even had pictures of them. There'd be times where he'd say, I'll leave you this information under this mailbox or something like that to a German, and the German spy's like, well, we need to, can we meet you? He's like, oh no, I need to get to my kid's soccer game, and he made sure that there was a soccer game going at that time. So so the Germans could have gone over there, or even the British could have gone over there. And, who was the spy? Well, he's one of those parents over there, but they were meticulous in just making sure they couldn't be found out that they were a fake. And he actually fed enough information to the Germans to where he was trusted, that many of these fake identities were trusted. In fact, and for many of these identities, he became the voice for them. There was, I think, 1 or 2 in particular that he was the voice for them. So, anyways, just to add more to the story, when Normandy happens, or when D-Day happens, and the Germans see the massive amount of stuff coming out of the paratroopers, those beaches start getting assaulted, they're like, this is the real thing. The Germans on the beaches, the German army, the German soldiers and commanders there on the beaches, like, this is the real thing. This has to be the invasion. There's so much coming at us right now. This has to be the real invasion. So, please bring in the Panzers, bring in Runestadt's Panzers, destroy them. Here's the problem at the time, though. Runestadt had fallen out of favor with Hitler, and he was actually relieved of his command. Rommel was given command of both the beaches and the backup Panzer divisions. It just so happened that when D-Day happened, I don't know if this was planned by the Allies or if it was just a stroke of luck, but Rommel was actually back in Germany either celebrating his son's birthday or his anniversary. I think it was his son's birthday. So he wasn't there. And Hitler was so OCD that he would not let anybody do anything without his express say-so. So while Rommel was not there to issue executive decisions, and he was the only one that was able to do so aside from Hitler, well, then it's Hitler is the only one that can give executive decisions. So Rommel wasn't there to give any orders. So the men on the ground, the German soldiers on the ground, seeing this massive invasion coming at them, are basically calling Hitler saying, what do we do? What do we do? Do we send in the Panzers? Do we send the Panzers? Please send in the Panzers. We need them. This is the real thing. And he pretty much says, well, just a second. Let's find out. And how do I put this? I just lost my vocabulary. I'm kind of talking this up a little bit, kind of changes more into an artistic story than necessarily the exact ways it happened. You can look up the exact way it happened, but essentially kind of how this goes down is Hitler basically just tells his soldiers, wait a second, and he kind of picks up the phone with Garbo. That's not really how it happens. Garbo actually was sending messages to him, but Hitler was paying attention to it. But basically, just long story short here, Hitler wants to know Garbo's opinion, one of his fake identity opinions. And Garbo tells him, nope, there is massive evidence that the real invasion is about to come at Calais, that the invasion of Normandy is just a diversion, and that they're about to launch the invasion at Calais as well. Essentially, hold your panzers back. So Hitler does not send in the panzers, which would have been devastating to the Allied troops. Again, we don't know really what would have happened, but it would have been really bad for us. Maybe we still could have come through that one. Again, I don't know. It would have been bad. It would have been really bad for us, but those panzers were held back. Now, they weren't held back indefinitely. After a few days, when the invasion of Calais doesn't happen, it pretty much was known that, I guess that Normandy really is the real invasion. But by the time the Germans realize, after days, getting to like June 10th, June 11th, June 12th, that was more than enough time for the Allies to land so many men, hundreds of thousands of men, and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of vehicles, tanks, half-tracks, trucks, jeeps, motorcycles, and whatnot, onto those beaches that we pushed far enough in that even if they brought the Panzer divisions down at that point, we had too much stuff on the ground at that point. We had successfully invaded France, and we were there to stay. And as I'm talking about, a lot of that you can attribute to this double agent, aka triple agent. The reason why I say triple agent is well, he was working for the British, but he's also working for the Germans, but he's really working for the British. So, anyways, just again on the crazy side. By the way, both those pictures are of Garbo. It definitely looks very different, but those are both of Garbo. So I believe they are, from my research at least. Now, okay, so in comes the next part. If you remember from the lesson last time, I talked about one of the major reasons why the Germans weren't as worried about Normandy being the major spot, even though that is where the Allies do attack, is that there's no ports. So the Allies solved this by making a portable port. They essentially build a port. They build a port, a pier system in Britain, and float it over to Normandy. And you're looking at that. All those pictures are showing this idea of they're building it on one side and then sending it over to the other. And all of a sudden, you can get in all these troop transports and all these ships with all the tanks on it and unload them like it was Cherbourg or Calais, a major town with piers coming out. It's like this was definitely a huge engineering feat. And if this didn't work, this is one of those parts of the plan that if this didn't work, it would have severely crippled us as well. But it did. It's just one of the more crazy things, just these ideas that the Allies came up with in preparation for D-Day and making it work. Now, after we do get on there and it's pretty apparent that we're there to stay, doesn't mean that it was easy for the Allies. In fact, probably the hardest fighting came within the 3 weeks after D-Day. because this is all hedgerow fighting in the area of Normandy or northern France there. The picture on the bottom left is what describes that quite well. Like if you're a soldier going through that area, you're not seeing like wide open expanses. It's kind of like not being here in Utah, being able to see basically from Point of the Mountain all the way down to Santa Quinn on a good clear day. You're hampered by all these hedgerows. And these hedgerows acted a lot like the trenches of World War I. You just don't know what's on the other side. And the Germans had the advantage here. They can pick and choose which of those areas to defend and which areas to just really make the Allies sweat. So the Allies were just very slowly going on. But the Germans did set up a lot of traps. They took out a lot of our tanks. They set up a lot of kill zones to take our guys out. And it was a slugfest. It was just, we were just moving very slowly, and we're pretty much moving at World War I rates. After 3 weeks, we'd basically only made it, I think it was something like 13 miles inland, and we were hoping to be a lot further than that. So that's when finally, at least from our point of view looking back, Eisenhower says, all right, Patton, you are the best general we got. Can you make something of this? So Patton is put in charge of U.S. Third Army, which, by the way, was stationed about right here at the time, coming off of Utah and Omaha beaches. And, taken 3 weeks to just slug in 13 miles. But in the next 3 weeks, essentially because of Patton, it's everybody, but Patton is really the one that leads the way here. We liberate all of this. Like within the month, basically almost all of France is liberated. And Patton is given a lot of the credit for this. Now, by the way, I told you in an earlier lesson, talking about North Africa, Patton and Montgomery, the British general, they don't get along. Montgomery is there too. Like, look at his name is right there. He's in charge of all the British and Canadian troops that are up here. And this is not taking anything away from them. They are going up against some massive resistance. But Patton is able to break out. He does take the port of Cherbourg. Comes down here, pretty much takes the peninsula of Brittany, and swings around and creates what's called a pocket. Now, if you remember this, when we're talking about the initial invasion of Poland by the Germans in 1939, what they did to the Polish was just created all these pockets of defense. Patton essentially uses the blitzkrieg against the Germans here. He blitzkriegs across France. And then him, along with Montgomery, start just basically tightening the noose around all the Germans there. There's hundreds of thousands of German soldiers in here trying to push back against this Allied advance. Unsuccessfully, but they were putting up a pretty good fight. And just to talk about, so this will be the last thing we talk about, or one of the last things we'll talk about. The main last thing we'll talk about, and then we'll be done, is what's called the Falaise Pocket. This is kind of a closer up view of that. But the British and Canadians and everybody else is pushing in from the north. Patton and the Americans are pushing in from the south. And they're just closing the gap. And this becomes what's known as the Falaise Gap right here. And when the Germans realize we're about to get surrounded, they're just like, we got to get out of here. And so they just start trying to get out of there. And that's what you're seeing right here, is they're just trying to get as much as possible. And the American Air Force, or the Allied Air Force, American, British Air Forces just pummel them incessantly. They're in a line. They're easy targets. This is showing a lot of that destruction of that road. Essentially, you're saying that's an actual photo of just that destruction that happens because they're just all balled in right there. And it was easy for Air Force to take them out, not just the Air Force. When it comes down to it and closing that gap, you have, these are British or Canadians, one of the two, that are sitting at machine guns, they're shooting down at those Germans as they're trying to get by. And the Americans are on the other side, just like a mile away, just taking them on. And there's a story, I have to tell this one story. There's a story about how they done it. They felt like they closed the gap. No more Germans are trying to get out. It seemed like they were surrendering. Those that did get out, got out. The many that died. And so the machine gun fire had stopped. And then all of a sudden, a lone German on a motorcycle, one of those motorcycles with like the sidecar on it, just revs up and starts trying to get out. He tries to be the last one to get out, basically, and he's going. And both sides, on the southern side, the Americans, on the northern side, the British are just kind of taken aback, like, what is this guy doing? Pretty quickly, though, the British kind of come to and they start firing on this guy to try to take him out. Like, you're not going to get past us. The Americans don't. The Americans end up starting to cheer for the guy and clapping for him and saying, go, go, go. So, you have the American side cheering this German guy on, saying, you can do it, you can get out, because it seems like there's no way he's going to be able to. The British are firing on him, and he actually gets out. So that known as the last German to escape the Falaise pocket. So there's basically the very last part of the Battle of Falaise. By the way, there's so many more. I am skipping over so much. Like, I could do an entire class just on all the stuff that's going on here, but if you want to look up more specifically stuff, just crazy hard fighting that went on, the battles for cities like Carentan, battles for Caen, I hope I'm saying that right, Argenton, again, I hope I'm saying that right as well. But there's a bunch of major hot spots of fighting during this whole Normandy invasion that's just, it's rough for both sides, let's put it that way. But Falaise was the very end of it, and this is when basically the Germans just, they're on full retreat mode at this point, and they're pulling back as far as they can. So, and of course, one of the things that does happen is, I talk about it here, that's why I'm coming back, is the liberation of Paris. Now, there's a whole story that goes into that, especially with what happens with a Polish brigade or a group of Polish soldiers on a hill outside of Paris that I would love to talk about right now, but I don't have the time. I don't feel like I have the time to go into it. But you can look it up. I can't remember the name of the hill, dang it. Hill 43, Hill 242. I'm mixing them up in my mind right now. But look it up. It's a good story, a crazy story, and a depressing story all at the same time. But it just kind of gives you a lot more respect for the Polish in World War II and just what they dealt with. Anyways, I'll just end off on that note, and we'll see you guys later.